Well, hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm Stephanie Pedrosa, Senior Marketing Manager at Origo Software Technologies. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today in Origo's webinar series. If you've joined our past webinars, you can tell that we are on a whole new platform where you have control of what your webinar experience will look like. Right before the webinar, we showcased some drone footage of the Brent Spence Bridge provided by the state of Ohio. So thank you, State of Ohio, for providing that bridge. And in today's webinar, our panelists will discuss how they're collaborating to complete two major bridge replacement projects. The Brent Spence Bridge, which was showcased right before the webinar and connects the state of Ohio and Kentucky, and the Interstate 5 Bridge connecting the state of Washington and Oregon. At Origo, we've been helping owners manage their infrastructure programs for 2 decades, and we understand how complicated it can be to manage your capital programs. And it becomes even more complicated when you need to collaborate with another agency to complete those projects. So transportation executives from these 4 states will share the challenges they have faced and lessons learned while executing these high-profile initiatives. A few quick notes before we get started. This webinar will be recorded, and we will provide all registered participants with the recording. The slides will also be provided to all registered participants. And we ask that you please submit any questions throughout the webinar via the Q&A chat box, and we will answer questions towards the end of the presentation. If we don't get to all the questions during the available time, we will follow up with you via email. You will also notice that we have a new resource tab where you can download content for this webinar. The drone video that was provided by the state of Ohio will also be included in this resource tab. If for some reason you cannot access the content, please email marketing@origo.com. And joining me today is my colleague and marketing director, Richard Kramer, who will be moderating today's webinar. Hello, Richard.
Hi, Stephanie. Great to be here.
Awesome. Thanks so much for being here. And now I'm really excited to introduce our panel of transportation executives. Joining us today is Roger Millar. He is the Secretary of Washington State DOT and AASHTO Vice President, who is an experienced land use and transportation engineer, planner, and program manager with an international reputation for innovative approaches to conservative development. The prominent theme that has run through his career has been planning and implementing transportation systems that are not ends unto themselves, but rather the means toward economic vitality, environmental stewardship, social equity, public health, and aesthetic quality. Roger, thank you so much for joining us.
Good to be here.
Thanks. And next we have Chris Stickler, the Director of Oregon Department of Transportation, who leads all aspects of the agency, which include delivery of Oregon's multimodal transportation system, alongside a dedicated staff of over 4,700 employees. He is expected to improve Oregon's environment and economy, to modernize its transportation network, to diversify the department's workforce, and to bring innovative solutions to achieve Oregon's transportation, environmental, and economic goals. Chris, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks. Next, we have Jack Marchbanks, the Director of Ohio Department of Transportation, who was responsible for the department's 5,000 employees and development of $3.3 billion budget. He provides strategic direction to statewide administrators of the agency's finance, human resources, information technology, legal, and communications division, as well as the opportunity, diversity, and inclusion programs. Jack, thank you so much for joining us.
Happy to be here.
Thanks. And last, we have Jim Gray, the Secretary of Kentucky Department of Transportation, who restored Lexington's financial ship through a series of reforms, which included reducing the city's employee health insurance costs while at the same time improving employee satisfaction. His reform of the police and fire pension system preserved the retirements of more than 1,000 retirees while saving the city millions. He revitalized the city's downtown and facilitated making Lexington the largest gigabyte city in the nation. Under his leadership, Lexington was named the 4th best city run in the country. Jim, thank you so much for joining us.
You bet. Thanks, Steph.
All right, well, now we will get the webinar started. These gentlemen have a lot of great content to share, so I'll pass it over to you, Richard.
Thank you, Stephanie, and very warm welcome from me to everybody in our audience. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us today. I think this is going to be a very interesting webinar. You know, both of these bridge projects are important. They're not just important to the sort of local communities that they're in terms of, people getting to work and commuting and that kind of stuff, but they're actually both major thoroughfares for trade. So their importance really spans out across regions and even to really the whole country. My understanding is that, for example, anything coming in to say the port of Seattle or the port of Vancouver that needs to go down the West Coast to say California or further out in the country is pretty much going to go over the Interstate Bridge over the Columbia River. And similarly, between the Brent Spence Bridge, there's just tons of trade that is going from, say, if you're sending anything from, say, the Northeast down to Texas or further west in the country or vice versa, very likely to go over the Brent Spence Bridge. It's just such a major artery. So I'm very excited to hear from our panelists today about these projects and also learn a little bit about the challenges, as Stephanie said, and the lessons learned when it comes to bringing two major agencies together to deliver a big program like this that affects, constituents on both sides of the rivers, I guess, in this case. So let's get started, and I'm going to start with the Interstate 5 bridge replacement over the Columbia River between the states of Oregon and Washington. And Chris, I'm going to start with you. We have some facts and figures up on the screen as well for our audience to take a look at, but in your words, if you can just tell us a little bit of background about the project and why is it important?
You bet. Well, again, Chris Strickler, and I want to thank you for having me here today, and clearly my partner, Secretary Millar. Please jump in at any time as I give just a brief introduction. So the Interstate 5 project, or the Interstate 5 bridge that connects the states of Oregon and Washington, we often refer to it as the last remaining stoplight on I-5 between Canada and Mexico. It is a lift span, originally constructed in 1917 as a single bridge. The second bridge was constructed in the 1958 timeframe and really intended to serve different functions than what we have today. Neither of them are seismically resilient. They carry a significant amount of Oregon and Washington's economy, as you just described, Richard. Both states are net export states, and so just about everything that we see coming out of the ports is finding its way either across or to this bridge in some form or another. A little anecdote, the bridge itself carries about 140,000 vehicles a day, and about 10% of those are freight traffic or freight trucks. So a higher percentage of trucks than we would see on some of our other facilities, and it really speaks to the economic need for this connection. This bridge also, though, does connect two local jurisdictions. It connects the two states. It connects the economies. I mean, it serves so many uses, which is the reason why we've been talking about what's the best kind of future for this connection for quite some time. I'd say I've been involved with this for the better part of 20 years, and it feels like it's gone by in a blink of an eye. As we look to the project status, we are looking to a replacement bridge in 2025. That's when we would start construction. You see the planning estimate and the current funding there. This bridge really does signify a partnership between the states of Oregon and Washington. We call this a little bit of the Noah's Ark of project delivery. We carry forward two by two all of our partner agencies, whether that's our local metropolitan planning organizations or our local cities, local ports, are all involved in the process. This is a project that serves many, many needs and many folks in many jurisdictions, and the partnership is of utmost importance as we move towards that construction phase. The partnership between Oregon and Washington has been a long-standing partnership. We have several bridges that connect our two states, and this is probably the first, at least in my tenure, that we've been working towards replacement of. And so that does trigger a series of challenges that we'll talk about a little bit later in the webinar, but maybe I'll pause there and turn to my partner, Mr. Millar, and see whether or not he has anything that I missed.
Well, I think Chris provided a great overview. I'll add a couple of things. I moved out to the Pacific Northwest in 1982 when I graduated from college, and I moved to Hazeldale, Washington, which is a little town just a little north of Vancouver. And I commuted across this bridge in '83 to a job at the city of Portland for about a month. And then I moved to Portland because the traffic was bad then. It has been an issue in the region for quite a while. And it's different folks look at the structure differently. The Portland, Vancouver metropolitan area is a 2-state, 4-county area with a couple of million people. It's a large metropolitan area for the Pacific Northwest. But the river is a divider in terms of economies and politics and the rest of that. And for people who live in Washington and commute to jobs in Oregon, or people who live in Washington and go to shop in Oregon, their issues are very local, very local. When you look at the Port of Vancouver and the Port of Portland, their issues are much broader because they are moving freight. A lot of the export out of those ports is agricultural and resource based. A lot of the imports, we import cars and containers and all kinds of stuff. And so they have a much more regional perspective. And then when you look more broadly at the national interest, as Chris said, it's the only stop sign on I-5 between Canada and Baja California, the only stoplight. It is one of the top 40 infrastructure investments in terms of the nation's economy, because product from Wyoming and North Dakota, Colorado, Utah, what have you, goes out through the ports here in Portland and Vancouver, and also the Port of Seattle and the Port of Tacoma, the Northwest Seaport Alliance, which is a huge port complex. The interstate system, east-west, I-84 is on the Oregon side of the river. They have to cross the river, the trucks do, to get to Seattle and Tacoma and vice versa. So there are local interests, there are regional interests, there are national interests. The facility, in 1917, it was designed for a lane of traffic in each direction and a trolley line. Today, there are 3 lanes of traffic in each direction, and generally those lanes are congested about half the day. But what we don't have is quick and convenient and safe pedestrian and bicycle access across the river, and quick and convenient, high capacity transportation access across the river. So we're looking at a car and truck centric facility in a multimodal time. So that's a pretty good overview of where we're at.
Thanks, Roger and Chris. It must be exciting to finally see the construction of something on the horizon now after knowing about the initiative, or it being an issue for, I think you said 20 years, Chris, so that's great. And folks, if you're interested in learning more, the program has a great dedicated website where you can sort of go and see more of this info. They also have a couple of the proposed designs up of what the new bridge might look like. So it's very interesting. Feel free to go and just Google that and check that out if you're interested. So let's move on to the Brent Spence Bridge between Ohio and Kentucky. And Jack, I'd ask you to start and just give us your thoughts on, the background and why it's important to the local area and the region.
Well, thank you, Chris. It's a pleasure to be part of this discussion today. These are 2 nationally significant infrastructure projects that have to be completed here if the respective regions are to prosper and to improve their quality of life. Like with IBR, we've been working on the Brent Spence Bridge companion span since 2005. So it's a 17-year-long process. For those of you who are not aware of the Midwest and the Mid-South, the Brent Spence Bridge carries I-75 and I-71 over the Ohio River, a river named after the Buckeye State, but most of it is owned by Kentucky. I often let Jim Gray know that. But it is a critically important, nationally significant corridor because it connects I-75 from Port Huron all the way down to Miami Beach, Florida. And This bridge carries, by many estimates, including our regional planning commission, the Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana, Tri-State MPO, carries 4%, over $300 billion worth of freight value every year. The original bridge was constructed in 1963. It opened the same weekend that John F. Kennedy was assassinated, so nobody remembers the bridge opening, but we know about it now. This bridge has 3 12-foot lanes and approximately 5-foot shoulders. The current bridge is structurally sound. However, it is functionally, it's obsolete in terms of its narrow shoulders. It's unsafe. There is no opportunity for anything but trucks and cars to cross the Ohio River. It actually is not going to be replaced. We're going to build a companion span to the west, or to the right of the current Brent Spence Bridge. And of course, in addition to building the new span, we are going to refurbish the existing bridge. A preferred alternative was approved in 2012. That decision was based on a federally prescribed evaluation process that includes technical and environmental analysis, as well as comprehensive public engagement, which we are refreshing. The exciting thing about what we're doing now is that we have two governors, our governor here, Mike DeWine, and Governor Andy Beshear in the Commonwealth, who are singing from the same hymnal. They are totally on board with this partnership, which I believe is going to be fruitful for both the Commonwealth and for Ohio, because this bridge project is even going to become more important because we have north of us the Gordie Howe International Bridge, which will be opening in 2025, which will supercharge an already very, very busy freight corridor. Again, the existing bridge is congested. It was designed to carry 80 to 100,000 vehicles daily, and right now it's twice that. Anyone in this area will tell you that it carries about 160 to 200,000 vehicles per day. It's not just the construction of a companion span, but improving the main line just north of Cincinnati going into Covington. So it's an 8-mile project, and we are excited about the opportunity to work together with the Commonwealth of Kentucky to actually launch a bridge project by 2025, actually late 2024. So again, we believe these two projects, both IBR and the Brent Spence Bridge Companion Project, are projects that will be successful in winning discretionary funding because they're needed. They're needed for the Pacific Northwest and for the Heartland. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Jack. Yeah, they're great examples of, I think, why the IIJA that passed last year was needed, and the kind of knock-on effects that infrastructure can have on the economy, and why it's so critical to a lot of everything else we do. So, Jim, I'd like to get your thoughts from the Kentucky side on this project, just its background and importance.
Sure. Well, in the spirit of cooperation and collaboration, I will say right out of the gate that Jack's done a great job, and of sharing the key points of the project itself, the history of the project, the significance of the project. It struck me right out of the gate when I became Secretary of Transportation for Kentucky. It struck me right out of the gate that this bridge is really the poster child for constraint, poster child now today for the IIJA, the bipartisan infrastructure legislation and law. And why is that? Well, Jack gave the numbers, and the numbers actually that struck me at the very beginning were 3 to 4% of the nation's GDP. And if we translate that, the nation's GDP today is something like $25 trillion. And that would mean that we're carrying over this bridge somewhere north of $600 billion a year in freight and goods. And of course, as Jack mentioned, 160,000 vehicles a day, where it was designed for 80,000. I'll say, just as a footnote, that we got that Director Marchbanks and I, you see, we're collaborating because we're on first name basis. So I say we got a good crash course, I would say, and literally and figuratively, in November of 2020, when there was a major collision and an intense fire on the lower deck of the Brent Spence, and it burned so intensely that we had to remove almost 7,000 square feet of the upper deck, much of the steel structure, and we didn't know how much of it was going to be compromised, but we restored it to traffic in 41 days, and it really did illustrate for me, as I said, it was a crash course in collaboration. There's no playbook for it necessarily. There are those that we can lean on, but it did illustrate how two states can come together and work together on a project quickly. So that's my contribution to it, Richard. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. I'm glad you mentioned the fire because, folks, if you haven't heard the story of the fire on the bridge, do yourself a favor and just look it up there's a great 6 or 7 minute video on it on YouTube. Just, I guess, search Brent Spence Bridge fire. And you'll see the whole story there and what happened. It's actually fascinating and just kind of inspiring at how, the folks were able to come together and get this thing repaired so quickly because with the amount of traffic that goes over it, I mean, you can't imagine the disruption that it must have caused. So it's just a great story for infrastructure. So I'm glad you mentioned that, Jim. So great. Let's switch and let's sort of double click, talk a little bit about the challenges. We're going to go back to the Interstate 5 bridge over the Columbia River. Chris, just tell us a little bit about how things have been going, how the roadblocks you've sort of run into, and where the project is at right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So, any major project is difficult to move through a legislative process because there's a lot of questions you have to answer. There's a lot of really legitimate inquiries that drive into what does the design look like and what are the implications statewide for a project that kind of has a local presence, right, in a lot of people's minds. So as we look at some challenges of that, you can imagine that that's in any bi-state project, just like our peers here. That's amplified. That's doubled, right? In some ways, it almost feels like more than double, depending upon how you approach the financial constraints. So, as we think of challenges for the Interstate Bridge, I mean, one is, of course, urgency, but the other is that legislative piece of how do we combine two legislative approaches to fund a project of this size? Because projects like this, they aren't funded with state funds alone. They are projects that cobble together multiple funding sources. And that really does take a partnership across state lines to really address the needs of what's likely to be, and in our case, two very different regional approaches to how projects come together. And we have to marry those so that we can ensure a future that serves both sides of the river. A question in the chat is leveraging previous FTA support. That's a great question. You heard Roger earlier mention that these bridges were designed for something that was to serve a very different purpose, right? And it was in many ways to serve a purpose that has long since gone. And I would say almost in every way, with the exception of the vehicular traffic that we still have to serve going forward. But in the future, our expectation is that we have a high-capacity transit mode that moves forward not just the interconnected nature of the region, but moves forward a different way of delivering projects. In the future, we anticipate active transportation being a significant portion of any project like this. And so as we're combining all of those different public feedback, partner feedback, legislative feedback, we really are trying to thread the needle with something, just like any of these major projects do, and trying to do so in a way that serves so many different aspects for a future that we're still doing our best to predict the outcomes of, right? We're looking for this bridge to serve the next 100 to 150 years, and so we have to be thinking long-term in our decision-making today. Those challenges, again, are amplified in a bi-state project, which is why that partnership is so important. And as we heard from our peers on the other bridge project, Roger and I have frequent opportunity to connect on things just as they pop up for this project. The last thing that I'll mention is, I know lessons learned is a little bit later, but one of the things that you learn in a project like this is how you manage it is as important as the details of the project itself. And the last time we were advancing this project, we had that dual-headed monster of two project directors, two project teams kind of working together. And while it was one co-located office, it did not have that uniform structure that we have now. And so Roger and I were pretty adamant at the beginning of this process that we had a single project and program director that led the entire effort. And I just wanted to acknowledge Mr. Greg Johnson. He's doing a fantastic job right now, carrying forward the efforts for both states to really manage through this laundry list of challenges. So that's my contribution. I'll pass to the Secretary to give his thoughts as well.
Yeah, well, Chris provided a great overview, and we almost got this project over the top back about 10 years ago, and for a variety of reasons, it crashed and burned, and it lay dormant for a while. So, one of the challenges we've had is there is a lot of history, and it's in a context, and the region has changed, and some of the players have changed. Many of the players remain the same. So building a multi-billion-dollar piece of infrastructure, a single piece of infrastructure in the northwest corner of the state of Oregon and the southwest corner of the state of Washington, it's right at top of mind for the people and the elected officials who live right there. But taking this up to Olympia or down to Salem, where other people have other priorities and billions of dollars, it could be spent any number of ways. You have to work through that legislative alignment at a state level and at a national level as well. The FTA grant that was in place for the previous project, that money got spent elsewhere, and we have to go back. And it's a good time to go back with IIJA, both on the transit side and the highway side. But there's the fiscal constraints of the two agencies. The image is really not at all relevant to the particular situation we're in, is that there is a lot of ship traffic under our structure, and it's directly adjacent to two airports. So we have federal agencies wanting to restrict the height of the bridge, and federal agencies wanting to get the bridge as high as it can be. So the design and data and standards are challenging. We have two federal partners in the Federal Highway Administration and the Federal Transit Administration. So getting them lined up, and I think we've done a really good job of aligning them. The leadership in Washington and Oregon, the two district administrators on the FHWA side and the region administrator on the FTA side have been incredible partners in making this work. And then the other thing is that public feedback and public perception. Everything in Washington state is measured through a climate lens and an equity lens. And I think you see a lot of the same in Portland anyway, and I think in Oregon as a whole. And this is about freight and trucks and stuff. And so there is a vision out there of, wouldn't it be great if it was just high capacity transit and a bike path and we got rid of all those cars, And there are people saying, but we're moving a huge fraction of the nation's economy across this facility, and that's moving on trucks. And then you've also got people who live in one state and work in the other. So there are lots of different publics that we're engaging, and doing this work with them is really critical to the success of the program. If you don't do stuff, if I've learned anything over the last 40 plus years, it's that if you don't do stuff with people, they assume you're doing it to them. And you kind of deserve what you get when you get into a situation where people on any side of the issue think that you're doing the project to them instead of with them.
Yeah, thanks, Roger. I mean, one thing I think Stephanie and I have noticed is that the topic of equity and public engagement and so on has really come to the fore just in the last 12 months, even, I guess with the run up to the IIJA being signed and so on, it's just a big topic in our space right now. So thanks for that. The thing that struck me about the bridge when I was doing a bit of research was when it opened, you had to pay a 5-cent toll to go over. And a lot of the traffic that was going over was horse-drawn carriages. One of the fascinating things about infrastructure is just thinking, it's a long-term play. It really is. So who knows we've gone from horses to cars. I mean, who knows what this bridge that we're replacing what the challenges are going to be in 50 plus years. But thank you for that. And this picture, I've been to the Columbia River Gorge. It's such a beautiful part of the country. I don't think that picture really does it justice. But again, if you guys want to go and Google and look it up, it's just an amazing part of the country. I have not been to Ohio and the Ohio River, so I can't speak to that. But let's switch back to the Brent Spence Bridge. Jack, I'll start with you again. Yes, same sort of thing. What are some of the challenges in the overall program? There's the long-term concerns, obviously, that have been going on. What are some of the challenges you folks have faced?
Well, thank you, Rich. And again, we don't have steamships or large freight boats going under the Brent Spence Bridge. We do have steamboats, though. Those river boats of the Mark Twain era. We have that as part of our tourist attraction on the Ohio River. But in all seriousness, points well taken by both Chris and Roger. One thing that we totally agree on is that you have to involve people at the grassroots. The reason I believe we're moving forward now where we were stymied earlier back during the Kasich administration is that we have engaged local stakeholders and local communities. I can't give Jim and Governor Beshear enough credit for really reaching out to the people in northern Kentucky and Covington who are, very concerned about what a $3 billion bridge project is going to do for their community during construction and afterwards. So our initial challenge was getting over the fear, the concerns of particularly the people in northern Kentucky, and not making this appear as this is just something for businesses and for through freight. It is something that we're looking at improving the quality of life on both sides of the Ohio River. So again, one of our big challenges was overcoming that negative history that basically ran to such an extent that the Kentucky legislature voted to prohibit tolling on any bridge crossing the Ohio River between Ohio and Kentucky. We have overcome those challenges with astute work from our chief executives, and to the credit of Jim and his team, great work in the Commonwealth of Kentucky and getting both legislatures on board with the fact that this is a project that will benefit the Commonwealth and the Buckeye State. So you have two different state legislatures, as Chris pointed out, that they're going to be partners in this. What we're excited about is how we're overcoming this in terms of managing it and coming together is that our governor signed on February 28th of this year, just a couple of months ago, an interstate memorandum of understanding, which will ultimately result in an interstate cooperative agreement where we will have governance in black and white on how we proceed with a design build a project that is going to be larger than anything that either Ohio or Kentucky have done in their infrastructure construction history. The other thing that we're looking at is environmental evaluation. We're starting our NEPA reevaluation with those equity concerns, those environmental concerns that Roger mentioned, top of mind. So that's the challenge going ahead, but we're very confident that we are on a path to success here with the Brent Spence Bridge companion span.
Thank you, Jack. Jim, what about from the Kentucky side? What do you have to add?
Yeah, I'll just footnote a few things on what Jack's already said. He does a wonderful job of illustrating the project, and he's done it again, the details of it, the challenges that we have. He was generous when he said that we'd worked hard on the Kentucky side. For context, Covington, Northern Kentucky, and there are a number of communities in Northern Kentucky, but Covington is the community that's right on the river, opposite Cincinnati, and it's a much smaller city than, of course, Cincinnati. And it was really bifurcated in the original construction of the bridge when it opened in 1963. And so there's been some pain and some bitterness associated with that for a very long time in Covington itself. And so people in Covington the people who live in Covington don't see it in the same way that others see this bridge, it being such an economic engine for the states and for the country. Now, they see it as a pain often. So we've had to work on that really intentionally and very deliberately to develop the relationships. I often say, country aphorisms go a long way in business, and I often say that people do business with people they like, and you catch more bees with honey than you do with vinegar. And so what we're doing is really reaching out in perhaps in some unprecedented ways. I come from a private sector background in construction and then in elected public office as a mayor. And so I'm hoping that my experience of being a mayor and walking in those moccasins can relate to some of the issues, the urban planning and context issues in a meaningful way for the project. And those are the things that, working with Jack and his team, our team, has been really inspiring for me. I always think of, when I think of projects, and I think of Leo Tolstoy, the opening of Anna Karenina, where he said in the opening sentence that all happy families are alike and all unhappy families are unhappy in their own way. And projects are similar. If you get it on the right, if you catch it on and plan it in the right way from the beginning, and you develop these kinds of relationships and trust and really mechanisms that will allow us to engage these projects in a constructive and a positive way, then even a big project like the two that we're talking about here, they can come together, and they can come together successfully.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I'm really glad everyone's mentioning the people side of things so much, because we very, in engineering, we're very often focused on, the plans and, the structural integrity and that kind of thing. But these programs get so complicated that the human element just is, I think, always going to be the most important thing. So thanks for that, folks. All right, we're going to talk a little bit about the lessons learned now. And go back to Oregon and Washington. I'm going to start with Roger this time. So Roger, based on everything we said about the background and the challenges we've faced, what are some of the lessons that you and Chris and your colleagues have learned through this process?
It has been an interesting process. We're still in the middle of it, and I imagine we still have some lessons to learn. But Chris and I both agreed from day one, when you have difficult decisions ahead of you, you need to spend some time crafting how you're going to make those difficult decisions and who's going to be at the table. And so we spent, before we hired a program administrator, before we put the consulting contracts and all the rest of that out there, we spent a lot of time listening to our partners. It's the two DOTs, it's also the two metropolitan planning organizations, the two ports, the two cities, the two transit agencies, one each on either side of the river. How did they want to engage? At what level did they want to engage? Who should be making the decisions? We also had legislative oversight in Washington State. The legislature, on their own volition, created a bi-state legislative committee and reached out to their colleagues in the Oregon legislature. That was not our idea. That was our legislature's idea. We had to incorporate that into the process. We also had these issues of climate and equity that we needed to how are we going to incorporate that into the decisions? Who makes those decisions? So we spent a good 18 months processing the process, if you will. And that has paid off for us. We also agreed, as we indicated earlier, one team, one program lead. Chris and I did a nationwide recruitment, and we hired Greg. Greg is just a rock star. He reports to both of us, and that's been moving the project forward. We have spent an incredible amount of time on outreach. And it's not just talking to people, but it's listening to them and being able to show them where their ideas have been incorporated into what we do. So there have been tens of thousands of discrete points of contact in the community where the project team has reached out and engaged the community. We have been real intentional with our legislative alignment. The two DOTs have put the same amount of money into the project to date. Washington came first because I think our legislature was responsible for the shutdown of the earlier project. So our legislature, we made that peace offering across the river. The Oregon responded. And just recently with our Move Ahead Washington package, the legislature has set aside in the financial plan $1 billion for Washington State's share of this. So we've been really intentional with our state legislatures and with our congressional delegations. The delegations are strong advocates for this project because they see the need, and they are pressing real hard for us to be able to demonstrate that strong partner alignment at the local and regional level so that we can compete successfully at the federal level for funding. So those are some of the lessons that we've learned. Set up how you're going to make decisions before the decisions are in your lap, because people will, if you wait until you've got a hard decision to make, everybody's going to want the process slanted to benefit them, and that's a real difficult place to find yourself in. Chris, anything to add to that?
Roger, you did a great job of really capturing all of those big picture elements. I think I would add maybe just one or two things, starting first with an acknowledgement to Director Marchbanks and Secretary Gray, and applaud your efforts on focusing on the equity side of the Brent Spence Bridge. I will tell you, our industry has long focused and really had a natural bias towards things. My perspective has been we only exist in these roles because of people, and so our decisions should be based in people, and we should be having those conversations with all of our communities to really recognize not just what the future can be, but how do we really capture and have conversations about past harms. And so all of those things are part of the dialogue within our project team. And that's been a lesson learned for us. And I'll tell you, it's been a lesson learned for me in my own personal growth in the transportation sector, because my engineering degree through college did not afford me a path that told me how to engage people. It told me how to engage on things, designs, construction activities, and those things. So again, my hat's off to my peers working on the Brent Spence because you're dealing with the same issues we are. Maybe to further one other point, and that is Roger hit, I think, the most important aspect is making sure that you understand how you'll make decisions in advance of actually being in the tough position to make those. And that gets down to the people, it gets down to the relationships, it gets down to the process you've established. And it also gets down to, does everybody have the same goal in mind? While we look to the end outcome, right? The picture you hang on the wall, we all might have a different image of what that looks like. But if we can all agree that we need a picture on the wall and that the bridge needs to be replaced, that really is a great starting point to really build those relationships and set a process in motion. And I'm really proud of the fact that we've had the support of both governors of both states. We've had the support locally that it's time to do something. Now let's get the details right and really make sure that we're focusing on the people as we make decisions.
Thanks, Chris. I love that, the idea of setting up a sort of a unified program management office. I think that's a great lesson learned. Audience folks, I am seeing a few questions come in to the chat, so we're going to move on to lessons learned on the Ohio and Kentucky side. But if you have a question for our panelists, please keep them coming in the QA box in front of you. So I'm going to go over to Jim. Jim, same sort of question to you. What are some of the lessons you've learned as you've gone through this process?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that we just hit on this partnering and alignment issue, and Roger spoke to it well. And it's the coincidence or the serendipity of it. Jack and I were just talking day before yesterday about the perhaps engaging a partnering exercise between the two states. You know, in the construction industry, in the building industry, and the transportation world itself, in the vertical world and the civil works world, we often think of partnering, and we think of partnering between the owner and the construction, the contractors or the consultants. And in this project, it struck me the other day, and I think I feel like I've got Jack on speed dial now. And so I called him. I said, Jack, do we need to be thinking about, even though we're working well together today, we're still the beginning, a new beginning for the project, even though the project is 12, 15 years up, has a legacy of that length. It's the coincidence of that occurring and that being part of the conversation today really did strike me that we have some potential at our levels for this. Same is true with being intentional, of course, with our legislature and alignments between the legislative branch and the executive. We've been working that really very intentionally, very deliberately, very carefully, actually, because of the issues that Jack mentioned early on that we've had, the historic issues that we've had with Covington and Northern Kentucky as it relates to the existing Brent Spence. And so that, that's really the I'm just punctuating the points that Chris and Roger have already made. Communication. I do want to make this point, and I think Jack will reinforce it, that we discovered on the Brent Spence fire, or I discovered, I should say, that there were really three projects within one project. There was the fire, the inspection, the engineering, and the construction associated with the repair. And then there was the maintenance of traffic, 160,000 diverted, or 140 to 160,000 diverted vehicles a day, which was a huge project itself. And then there was the communication project. I'll never forget when the governor sort of gave me a pat on the back one day, and he said, "Jim, I don't think you all placed a yard of concrete on that project without telling the public." And he said what that did was it relieved the anxiety of the public that government can actually get something done. And so that was I think it was informing. We know that these big projects have major communication challenges. And so thinking of them, I think my own sense, thinking of them as a project in and of themselves, that communication element is an opportunity for us, a challenge and an opportunity, and which we'll undertake, I think vigorously. So Jack, you want to jump on?
Well, thanks, Jim. I appreciate that. And again, Ohio communicated as well on that infamous bridge fire back on Veterans Day 2020. One of the takeaways for me as Roger pointed out, we're midpoint, hopefully beyond midpoint in this process, with hopefully both projects being successful, is that you have to be fluid in the development of roles. Jim and I often speak, and we just had a conversation as who was going to be a sponsor on the grant applications. We made a decision that we think will be beneficial to the team. There's no ego involved here. What we want to do is get this companion span built so that it will benefit this region, the Great Lakes, the Mid-South, for decades to come. I think, Rich, you pointed out that these bridges are built with the intention that they'll last 50 years. Brent Spence Bridge is now 60 years old. And what we're looking at is doing something that we basically have to be kind of visionary on what we think the modes will be going ahead. And what we are putting in place here with the Brent Spence Bridge companion span between Kentucky and Ohio is something that will actually outlive, us in these positions. We're talking about an interstate cooperative agreement that will actually go beyond both the terms of Governor Beshear and Governor DeWine, with them having second terms. So this is something that you're doing in terms of creating good for the community, creating opportunities, not just for freight to go across the Ohio River, but for people to develop generational wealth, perhaps with some of the contracts that will be let on this $3 billion bridge project. So these are all things we have in mind. The other thing I am excited about in terms of a takeaway is the fact that Jim and I said, okay, let's figure out what we're doing as a team. And by the way, we have a bi-state management team that's been fantastic. Our people on the ground, Gary and Stacy over on the Covington side and Kentucky, and our team, Tammy and Stephen here on the Ohio side, we empowered them. We told them, make the best decisions and bring them to us, and we'll listen to you. So that listening, and then that in terms of that listening, we inform our governors. So we persuaded our governors. I persuaded my governor that you need to let tolls go because that's not going to work in Commonwealth of Kentucky. So we need to figure out a way forward, and we came up with a plan that we think actually is going to be made manifest. So we're excited about the lessons we've learned, which is basically no ego, roles evolve, and communicate often, early and often on every issue. Again, as we pointed out, we are preparing for our grant application, and our goal is success.
Thanks so much, Jack. And before I hand back to Stephanie to go over the audience questions, I just wanted to thank the four of you, not only for a great discussion today, but just a big thank you to you and your teams for helping build a better tomorrow for all Americans. It's really great to hear your stories. Folks, if you'd like to learn more about Origo Software Solutions in public feedback and engagement, in capital planning, right-of-way, or construction, please check us out on the web at origo.com. And with that, I'm going to hand back to Stephanie for questions.
Yeah, so we definitely have a lot of questions coming in. So the first question that came along, this is for Oregon and Washington. How much will Oregon and Washington Bridge project be able to leverage the previous FTA support efforts that include light rail?
Well, the FTA grant that was in place for the old project is no more. That was closed out when the project was shut down, and I think Hawaii got the money. But we have strong partners in the Federal Transit Administration, and with IIJA and the grant programs that are available, we believe we are competitive. We had Nuria Fernandez. I saw her yesterday, and she asked me how the project was coming along. But we have to apply for and compete for funding on the transit side and on the highway side with other projects, other worthy projects around the country. And I wish my colleagues with Brent Spence all the best, getting their project funded right after we get ours funded.
Awesome, thanks. Next question. So on the Brent Spence Bridge project, are there right-of-way considerations as a result of the companion span? And if so, what challenges exist there?
Well, Stephanie, let me get started on that one. 70 of 79 parcels needed on the Ohio launch point for the companion span have been secured, and we're covered here on the Ohio side. And of course, I know that Jim and his team have already taken action to make sure that the right-of-way acquisition, of course, with Justice 40 in mind, is occurring on the Covington Commonwealth of Kentucky side. Jim?
Yeah, that's right, Jack. I think you got a bit of a head start on us. You all have done a really commendable job, and so we can emulate now, take an example. But we've got roughly 8 miles of corridor on the Kentucky side, and so that's north of I think 100 parcels, I believe. Does that sound right, Jack?
Yes, on your side.
Right away. that we're going to have to acquire, right? So, and we're, that process is really just starting for us.
Thanks. Yeah, right of way is always a huge portion of any project. So we hear that a lot here at Origo. Another question, did any of the lessons learned from the collapse of the I-35 highway bridge in Minneapolis considered an assessment of the existing bridge and designs of the new bridge? So I guess did any of your bridge, I'm thinking what the question's saying, did you guys get any lessons learned from the collapse of the I-35 highway bridge in Minneapolis? This can go for both.
Why don't I jump in?
Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, Roger. I was just going to say, for us, we're consistently learning from things across the country. So I would say an emphatic yes. I mean, there are lessons learned. But from the perspective of structural stability and those kinds of things, we have a pretty frequent maintenance inspection program. Our project team is out there doing that. We share in the cost of that with Washington. And we have maintenance projects that we're still working on. And so we do have lessons learned going into the future. I think we're still putting lessons together all the way back as far as Loma Prieta and the earthquake in San Francisco, right? And really looking to what does a future bridge have to take into consideration. So maybe not specific actual takeaways from that specific bridge, but kind of a constant learning process to make sure whatever we design going forward really stands to the test of time.
Yeah, we're all learning organizations. When you look at any DOT, and in my AASHTO role, I know we're all learning from each other, learning from our successes, learning from our failures, learning from tragedies. For us with the I-5 bridge, for the longest time, when I first moved out to the Northwest, we didn't think we had earthquake troubles. That was our poor friends down in California that had to deal with that San Andreas fault, and we learned in the late 70s, early 80s about our own little problem up here in the Northwest, which is actually worse than the San Andreas. We, every 300 to 900 years, there's a 9 on the Richter scale or higher earthquake here in the Northwest, and it's been 325 years since the last one. We've learned from that knowledge, and that's one of the reasons it's so critical that we get these bridges replaced. They are not resilient in the sense of modern seismic standards. They're not resilient in terms of their functionality. They're not multimodal, and those are all things that we've learned as agencies and as an industry going forward.
And if I may add to what Roger and Chris have shared, of course, all state DOTs went out and checked all their bridges with gusset plates after I-35, and we did that, of course, here in Ohio. We have a very rigorous bridge inspection program, and we work with the Commonwealth of Kentucky, but Jim and company have done a fantastic job in maintaining the current Brent Spence Bridge, which will be used and refurbished even better as a part of this project for the companion span. Jim, you can tell people how much money you spend on maintaining the bridge. Jim tries to offload a little bit of that to Ohio, but what people may not know here is that the Brent Spence Bridge is actually owned by Kentucky.
Now, you've gotten that in twice today, Jack.
but we're willing to go half with you on the new bridge.
All right.
Yeah. Well, it looks like we are out of time, so we do have a couple more questions. And like we said, if we didn't get to your questions, we will answer and we will follow up via email. But gentlemen, thank you so much for this valuable information. I hope everyone enjoyed the webinar and enjoyed the information and enjoyed the platform. And I want to take the time to invite you guys to our next webinar, which will be on May 24th. And it will be regarding the current state of water infrastructure and the future of funding water projects. So be on the lookout for that email, for that invitation. And I hope everyone has a great rest of the day. Bye, everybody.